Welcome in, everybody. Sorry about the confusing title. I just realized it said that we were talking about Lazerhawk, and that's not what today's video is about. Welcome to the Joy of Gamemastering. We are here doing the thing. So please let me know if you're in the chat. RC is here. Good to see you, RC. Amongst the other nerds, I suppose. Hope everybody is having a great evening. I'm going to drop the shield here in just a second, but I'm making sure everything's doing the things it's supposed to. Yeah, go ahead and give us a shout out if you're here in chat. I'm going to go ahead and turn off, or at least turn the music down a little bit. Maybe we'll go with some lounge music too, instead of the lo-fi. See how that feels. We'll just talk about all the stuff. Hope everybody's having a great night out there. I just got back from an audition. I was auditioning for Hunchback of Notre Dame, and I think I did a pretty good job. We'll see. I'll know more about that hopefully sometime tonight, but probably tomorrow more likely. Let me get this modesty shield down. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's, this episode of the Joy of Gamemastering with Alex Thomas. I'm your host, Alex Thomas, and tonight we're talking about a very exciting topic. We're going to talk about how Gen Con went, and we're going to talk all about one of my favorite topics, pacing as a game master, and how you can better control that at the table. So if you have any questions related to pacing, please feel free to drop them into the chat. But yeah, I'll start with just Gen Con stuff. I got back yesterday, drove back from the Great Purgatory of Indiana, and Gen Con was amazing. It was everything I wanted it to be and more. I ran some amazing games over the course of the week. I got to meet a whole bunch of fun people from the industry and some of you. And I got to play a couple of fun games. I got to be Captain Cold for a few hours, which is always a good thing. I got to be the mom of the rogues. And RC was my Heatwave, which was a ton of fun. And I got to room with RC, which was also awesome. And Disembodied Troy, who is somewhere out there in the multiverse bothering somebody with his misty form. But yeah, I highly recommend Gen Con if you ever had the chance to head out there. It is enormous. It's a lot, but it's a lot in a really good way, I think, in my opinion. There's a lot of walking, a lot of people, a lot of games, a lot of interacting. And I'm happy. I'm grateful for it every year. I am exhausted and energized at the same time, which is a very interesting feeling. I'm excited to be getting back into my own weekly GMing and implementing some ideas I learned while I was there. I didn't get a whole lot while I was there, but I did pick up a copy of the Grim Hollow campaign setting by Ghostfire Gaming. I don't generally like D&D, but the fellas over at Ghostfire Gaming, they have great campaign setting, and they do a great job of really lasering in on what their rendition of D&D is all about, which is gothic horror, and they have a ton of great YouTube videos about breaking things down for gothic horror. I highly recommend them if you haven't had a chance to check them out. A couple of good guys from Melbourne, Australia. And I got my wife a Poochita from Chainsaw Man. She loves that anime, and I found a stuffed one. It was the last one at the booth, so I was like, I'm going to bring this home for her. So now we have a little orange dog with a chainsaw for a face. And our Pomeranian, but both are great. Yeah, but I think without further ado, we can dive into the topic at hand tonight, which is pacing. So, pacing not in terms of standing up and walking back and forth in a lot of different directions, but pacing in the means of how do I control the flow and momentum of a story as a game master? And there are a lot of fun techniques for that. I think the best way to go about it is to have a good plan going in, knowing I want to have these kinds of scenes in the story, detailing back to our M&M guidelines about combat scenes, challenge sequences, role-playing scenes, investigation scenes, and making sure that there's a wide variety of those kinds of scenes and that they don't usually happen in succession with one another. So you don't have two combat scenes in a row. You've got a role-playing scene, a combat scene, an investigation, back to a role-play scene, into a challenge sequence, into a combat, keeping an eye on those sorts of things. RC, my step count has also lowered dramatically, but it's still higher than it was before I went to Gen Con, so I feel like I really broke through a barrier physically through the convention, so I'll be excited to keep walking and building good habits off of that. But keeping your mind on what kinds of scenes you're doing and what order that you're doing them in is very helpful. The other thing on top of that is having a very solid backstory for your adventure and a very intricate idea of what you think is going to happen in the adventure. In our Astonishing Adventures line, we call this the backstory and the In This Exciting Issue section of the two, the sort of the beginning of the Astonishing Adventures. Backstory is 2 to 3 paragraphs that detail everything that has led up to this moment. So what the villain is up to, what they want, what created the circumstances that made their scheme possible in this moment. And then in This Exciting Issue is a paragraph breakdown of each scene of the story, so you know what the sort of overarching, this is what each scene is at its heart. So you can begin to plot out, this is a combat scene, this is a role-playing scene, this is an introduction scene. Hello, Learn Music. I hope you're having a great evening tonight. Thanks for joining us while we're talking about pacing as a game master. And all of that is very much the preamble to sitting down at the table. But a lot of what pacing comes to is your ability to control scene transitions while you're running the game. Pacing is very, you don't want your pacing to be boom, 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 boom. Variability in pacing is a very strong technique to learn. And the easiest way to begin a good pace is to have a strong introduction. Whether that scene is in media res, where you are starting off in the middle of something like a big fight, or you're at the end of the last adventure, quote unquote, going into the new story, or it's a simple scene where everybody is there and has a little brief moment to roleplay a little bit. All of those are perfectly good introductions, and they get people's minds in the right place. My Suicide Squad game I ran at Gen Con, that game starts off with group therapy. So they are all incarcerated at Blackgate Penitentiary. They're all in a big share circle, and their therapist says, what did you learn this week while you were here in Blackgate? And I go to each player and ask them, what did you learn? What did you learn? And then I tell them to role play out a brief description of what their character learned. They usually say something to the therapist. I'll give a line back. They'll respond to it, and then I'll move on to the next character. It's just a settling in, sort of getting a feel for everybody, understanding what the mood is at the table, and getting a sense of, okay, this is that kind of player, this is that kind of player, this is that kind of player, to really give yourself mental notes about what momentum and what pace you think the players are going to be respecting. In media res is also a great introduction, as I said, specifically because in media res gives you the ability to sort of soft teach the mechanics of the game you're running. So starting in the middle of a fight, tell everybody to roll for initiative, have everybody take one round, and then move on to the next scene. So basically everybody gets a chance to learn, okay, that's a standard action, this is a move action, this is what I roll as a modifier for this and that. It's it's a great opportunity to teach the game a little bit in a hands-on kind of way, because I find that often if you explain the whole mechanics at the beginning of the session, the players have difficulty retaining any of that information. So often when I'm sitting down to run Mutants and Masterminds for people who haven't played it before, I will give a brief rundown of the character sheet, and I'll often pepper in sentences like, this is the offense section. These are your ways to cause harm to various living beings. There's a name of your power in this column. There's a bonus to hit in this column. And then there's a DC, which covers damage. So we'll go over that when we get into combat, is what I'll say, to get people sort of moving along. That hands-on approach is a much easier way to get that information across quickly. And it is a way to jump into the action and let them know that this is going to be a high action-packed adventure. It's a clue for them, basically. So role-playing vignette in media res And then the end of the last adventure is it's also an in media res, but it's kind of a fun way to introduce, okay, so we just did this awesome thing. What bigger and crazier thing is about to happen in this adventure? So we're at the beginning of the session, so obviously this isn't the end of everything. Having them catch the villain of the last thing and then something happens, or having them, giving them a little win at the beginning and then something happens. There's a ton of cool opportunities there from a storytelling perspective and from an introduction perspective. So I always tell GMs, have a strong intro, whatever version of an intro you like, but a strong hook and a good opportunity to get people playing the game immediately will increase engagement at the table, and it will make sure your players they know that you're in the driver's seat and they're willing to follow along with your energy. After your introduction, it comes down to maintaining momentum at what speed you think is appropriate. Combat scenes, in my opinion, are exciting and interesting, but they do really slow story pace down, because combat in role-playing games takes upwards of 30 to 45 minutes to resolve. So that is going to be a good quarter of your game session if you are playing a 4-hour game session, say, or a 3-hour game session. You're going to be looking at a 33% of your story is that one fight. So I tell people to be judicious with where you're putting combat sequences in. If you are going to have a fight, make it an important fight where success or failure is exciting and interesting. Generally, I tell people don't waste time having them roll initiative and have a whole combat against a room full of mooks if they're trying to break into someplace, or if they're trying to, if the conclusion of the fight is pretty much a foregone conclusion, I tell GMs not to run that fight as a standard fight. Make it a skill check, or make it a narrative description for the players. Just tell them, you break into this place and give me a brief narration about what happens. You can beat up some guards, you can break in, you can do some booby traps, all that fun stuff. But that's not the meat of this adventure, so I don't want to get bogged down in the details here. The other issues you might run into with on the player side of pacing, at least, is analysis paralysis. So you run into a situation where you introduce a conflict, and the players are like, okay, there are 10 million ways to go about this, so let's talk about each and every one of them. That can really kill the momentum at the story. That can really kill the pace, and it can really kill the energy around the table, especially if it's only one player who is interested in doing the whole breakdown of every single option, and the other players are like, I don't know, man, let's just do it. There's a couple ways to get around that. The first one is to introduce a scenario and then not necessarily give them a chance to get too into the weeds about the details, particularly if you want to montage through this moment. Tell them, this is what's going to happen in this scene. I want you to make a skill check, and if you're successful, narrate this brief moment of that whole montage. The other thing you can do is, I hate to do this, but if they are bogged down and they're taking too long to get through a decision, bad guys catch them in the midst of their planning. Somebody kicks open the door, shoots a gun at them, which is sort of a trope in other forms of pacing advice for fiction and for novels and things like that, but it works. I was running one Cthulhu adventure back at Origins a few years ago, and it was supposed to be a 4-hour adventure of going into this church and descending down into hell, basically, and trying to make your way back up. And they spent an hour and a half of those 4 hours debating about what to do to get into the church, which I didn't intend to be a difficult task. That was on me for not moving the pace along and not asserting control as the GM. And I had the guards basically spot them while they were in an alley debating their whole plan. And one player was frustrated with that. He didn't come back after the break, which is, I could have handled that better. I could have made sure that, this isn't the end all be all of the adventure. I'm not going to kill you in the beginning hour of a 4-hour session. And there should be some communication there. Your players should trust that if you're running for a certain time slot, the beginning's probably not going to be the most dangerous part of it. That's a social contract you enter into as a game master, which is really important. That's sort of how to transition through and get through players that are sort of bogging things down. But you don't always want to step in moments like that. If the entire party is having a good time, if the entire party is having a good time discussing and having this big role playing moment, you could sit back and let them go for a little while. But keep an ear out, pay attention, take notes of what they're talking about. And if you start to hear them going in circles, now is probably a good time to move on from that scene. Apple Juice says, how often would you say one shots become 2 or 3 shots? Well, just myself, probably more often than they should. I have a notorious reputation for overwriting and over preparing things, so it's 100% possible. When you're running a one shot at a convention, though, you want to be really careful about that, and that comes down to the planning for your adventures. With a 4-hour time slot, you don't want to have more than 2 combats if you're playing Mutants and Masterminds or Dungeons and Dragons or any game where combat takes upwards of 30 minutes to 45 minutes. And then the other scenes you could sort of pepper between introducing the game, taking a break to go to the bathroom, challenge scenes, role-playing scenes, investigation scenes, talking to NPCs, all that fun stuff. And just keeping an eye on your time slot. I like to have a little clock behind my GM screen when I'm running games at conventions, so I can see what time it is or how much time I have left in the event. Sometimes I'll just have that clock be what time it is. Sometimes I'll do a 4-hour countdown, and I'll keep myself on track that way. Which is a little bit of out-of-game help, but that is another great tool at your disposal as a GM. Other little pieces of information about pacing. I think the most important thing that you can do is ensure that every scene in your adventure is there for a reason. When you're preparing scenes, you're preparing situations, you want to make sure that everything is there is in service of propelling the story forward or releasing tension. Because you don't have to have every scene be this end-all, be-all, super important thing if it provides some other benefit to the story itself. You'll get a feel for this as you're taking more time exploring your storytelling style and as a player and as a GM. But make sure every combat is very important to the story. Make sure when you call for rolls that success and failure are both interesting in their own regard. And make sure that you have a variety of different kinds of scenes and you know in your head sort of how long you want each scene to take. One other thing I'll do for pacing, particularly for my superhero games, is I will take each hour and break that out into an issue of a comic book story arc. So the first issue, this is the setting, this is the conflict that we need to resolve in this hour. The second issue, the third issue, and then the final issue of the story arc. So you sort of have each hour has a beginning, middle, and end, and you get the sense of how the story is supposed to progress. Supposed is a word I don't like to use for GMing, but it is something to be mindful of as you are creating this content. What other questions do people have about pacing and about all that fun stuff? And sorry about my voice. I just got back from Gen Con, and I just got back from an audition, so I'm a little raspier than usual this evening. I'm pretty new to M&M, but would you say that interrupting player planning that's taking hours would warrant a hero point if, say, the guards attack? I would. Yeah, if the players are taking such a long time to get through this, you're basically asserting a story beat. And anytime you assert a story beat as a Mutants and Masterminds GM, I would encourage you to hand out a hero point. One of the things about being an M&M GM is that hero points are a vital part of the back and forth between players and GMs. I believe that having fewer hero points handed out for players is worse than having too many hero points handed out for players. 100 points, hydrate. Oh, I've got some water here. Larry, Learn Music says that's so cool. It's awesome that you can break down M&M stories into comic book issues. It's great to have that reference point. Yeah, and you can do that for games outside of M&M too. Keeping in mind this is the beginning part of the story, the middle part, and the end. Breaking things into acts is also a good idea. If comic book issues isn't sort of a natural frame of reference for you, if you break things down into Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 1 is generally about 20% of a story. Act 3 is generally about 20% of a story, and that other 60% of the story is generally the middle bits. That's generally Act 2. So you could tell, okay, if I've got 6 scenes in a story, the first scene is going to be Act 1. So that's introducing the conflict, introducing the characters, introducing the villain. Scene 6 is going to be the end of the story, so wrap up, resolution. And then scenes 2 through 5 are going to be the majority of the adventure. Thinking about it that way really helps me knowing where I'm at in the story arc and how quickly I need to move through stuff. Generally, scene 1 and scene 6 are my shortest scenes in an adventure because the intro is just enough role-playing, just enough introduction to get the players hooked on the concept and into the main conflict of the story. And scene 6 is usually my shortest scene because it's usually like, okay, this is the epilogue, this is what happens after you solve the conflict. Scene 5 is kind of the big climax of the story. That's where the final fight or final negotiation, whatever the last scene is generally scene 5. And then scene 2, 3, and 4 I'll usually do a fight in scene 2 or 3. I'll do a challenge sequence and a role-playing sequence and an investigation somewhere in the middle of those parts. So thinking about it that way, sort of truncating it that way, having your introduction, your climax, and then your 2 fights are either scene 2 and 5 or scene 3 and 5. And then building scene 3 and 4 as something else that isn't a fight is a good sort of baseline idea as you're going in to make sure you have strong momentum throughout the story. And Apple Juice, thank you for signing up to play M&M. We really, I always appreciate new people coming into the game. If you have any questions at all about M&M, please feel free to drop them here. This Joy of Gamemastering is here to help you not just with regular GMing stuff, but also to introduce and answer questions for mutants and masterminds that anybody might have. And I think people can be surprised a little bit with how much of pacing comes down to formula, because your players will never notice that it's a formula, as long as you mix things up. Apple Juice says, do you have any advice for the pacing and execution of epilogues? A lot of GMs might struggle with what to do once the big climactic battle is over. Yes, I've got advice for that. So if you're running a one-shot at a convention, that's basically, hey, the story is over. Everybody tell me a little bit about what your character does with the new status quo. But if you're running a longer form campaign, epilogues can be sort of interesting connecting tissue from adventure to adventure. I like to give players time to, after they turn in the bad guy of the story arc or the adventure, I like to give them time to role play out a brief scene from maybe their side plot or their subplots. Have them meet a new contact, have them learn a little bit of information about, what benefit did we achieve by beating this villain, or how is the status quo changed, and letting them see that in a meaningful way. You can also do, not every GM can pull this off, but one thing I really like sometimes is a cinematic scene that is not something the players are privy to, but like if you beat a villain's lieutenant, having a brief epilogue scene where the GM describes, okay, this is the supervillain's reaction to that amongst their minions or in their lair, or I'll get you next time gadget. That kind of fun thing can also be a great epilogue. As for, other kinds of epilogues, handing out PowerPoints and telling people or telling your players, okay, I gave you some PowerPoints. What are you thinking about doing with them? And is there a way we can make a scene around that? So if they're putting points into combat training, do they go to the gym and learn how to fight some more? Do they meet up with an old boxer? Do they take a martial arts class? Are they just getting better at fighting because they've been fighting supervillains? One thing I like to do as a player is use my PowerPoints to improve something that happened in the adventure. So if I had a really good persuasion check, or I used my power in a new and creative way, I'll pump the points in that way. So maybe I'll take the power stunt I did and turn it to an alternate effect of my regular array, or I'll pump a couple of points into a skill that I did really well or I used a lot in the adventure. It's sort of an immersion thing for me. I know some people don't get into that, and that's perfectly fine. It's just something I like to do personally. RC, for characters with secret identities, how you handle pacing their day job life with both a group dynamic as well as the pacing and the A plot of a session. There's a lot of fun ways to do that. Adding in those little side scenes, especially in an ongoing campaign, it's a great opportunity to reveal more information about the character, reveal more information about the A plot if there's something related from between their day job and the A plot. And one way to make sure that it doesn't bog things down is to give the other players something to do in those day job subplots. One thing I do at session 0 often is I'll ask players, okay, who are the major NPCs in your character's life? And I'll have them bring that up. And then during session 0, I'll look at the other players and say, would any of you be interested in role-playing that NPC when they show up in those side scenes? So that players have things to do in each other's subplots, and they have a chance to keep role-playing, and you don't basically, I'm talking to this person for 10 minutes, the rest of you get on your phones or whatever. I found one thing with pacing that's important to keep in mind is touching on other characters and not spending too much time with one character or one group at a time. I found my sweet spot is generally like 5 to 10 minutes before doing switches. So if the party splits, I'll spend 5 or 10 minutes with group 1, and then I'll switch over to group 2, or player 1, player 2, all that fun stuff. Because that can be one of the biggest killers for momentum in the game, is when the GM spends too much time focusing on one subplot to the exclusion of everybody else. The players can really sort of tune out if it's not important to their character. You hope that doesn't happen, but it's human nature. If we're not being interacted with, sometimes it's hard to pay attention. Sometimes it's hard to keep up with them. So incorporating other players into the NPC storylines is a great way to avoid some of that. And then finding ways to tie day job stuff into the A plot is always fun, or ensuring that each day job plot has an interesting conflict of its own that the other players are invested in. So what are you trying to learn in your day-to-day life? What is your characters trying to improve about themselves? Is there a competition to get a promotion? Is there, are you in a shitty job and you're trying to switch into something else? Sort of finding something relatable and something exciting to follow along is a lot of fun. These are all great questions. Thank you, guys. You're carrying me because I am definitely struggling a little bit after Gen Con. It was just a lot of energy for the week. Yeah, and it's just important to keep an eye on the pace, because you're sort of encouraging how much fun people are having at any time, which is complicated and it's hard, but it's very important. Because M&M have mechanics that deal specifically with secret identities and things like that. The only thing that explicitly deals with secret identities would be hero points and complications, because if your secret identity comes up in the story in a way that inconveniences your player, you're looking at a complication and you get a hero point for that. One thing you can do in M&M to simulate some mechanics for secret identity stuff is to make a long-form challenge sequence for the secret identity. So if your character is a student, they have a school skill challenge, and every adventure you have them roll a check on that, and that determines how well they've done at school or at their job during that week of adventuring. And keeping track of that as the story goes along, having regular points where you check in, okay, how many successes do you have on this long-form skill challenge at the moment? And we'll sort of reflect on how that is affecting your life. If you're doing really successful, maybe you've got high grades, but also maybe you're burned out because you've been doing superheroing and you've been studying like crazy and you haven't really made time to do anything fun and social. Or there's you can, you're competing for a promotion at work, and you can roll for the NPCs to see how well they're doing at the work, and maybe give them a bonus because they're not superheroes in the background. If you want to do it that way, like Lois Lane is always a better reporter than Clark Kent, because Lois Lane is awesome, but also because Lois Lane doesn't have to do Superman stuff, all the time. That half of the time when she's doing reporter stuff. But that's a cool way to monitor things like secret identities and maintaining sort of episode to episode plot and pacing. I think another excellent tool to improve for yourself as a GM is your ability to listen and keep an eye on, be empathetic to your players' energy. Listening to what they're saying while they're discussing, feeling if they're excited, if they're engaged, what does it look like for them, all that fun stuff. And being able to know, okay, they are having a good time discussing this, I'll stay out of the way, but I'll write notes. And okay, they've sort of talking in circles and they need somebody outside of their discussion who's an unbiased moderator to basically say, this discussion is, we're at a stalemate. What do you want to do? Because you're talking to each other in circles and nobody's giving any ground. Being able to push that way. But if you listen to your players, they will often give you ideas for fun story plots that you could just take credit for and not tell them that, oh yeah, that was an improv. Apple Juice, that's cool. Me and my friends are streaming a campaign and their identities are going to start coming into play soon. Awesome. What's the name of your campaign and where do you stream it, Apple Juice? I'd love to check it out. And thank you for broadcasting Mutants and Masterminds on a public platform. I was very pleased. I'm glad the Marvel Multiverse RPG came out this week, and I've been reading through that, and there's a lot of fun things in there. But I did see a good review that gave Eminem a lot of high points, which I'm always happy to see because we've been here for a long time, and I think we do a lot of things pretty well to represent superhero mechanics at the very least. I think we'll keep this episode relatively short, much like pacing. We're really enjoying the system so far. It's called Confirmed Chaos, and we're streaming here on Twitch. Cool. I will add that to my list of things to check out and support. Just add a note real quick to myself. I have a list of Eminem live streams. And I'll be sure to give your title and information to Troy, our community manager, as well, so that he can tune in and maybe reach out and maybe we can talk about a couple of benefits for streaming the game. It's not a pen this time, RC. It's a keyboard alert. Confirmed Chaos. Is your Twitch channel just applejuice.tv? Applejuice? And what times do you stream? Well, Applejuice, I'm a little biased, but I am the GM for an ongoing Mutants and Masterminds campaign over at twitch.tv/Untold Stories Project. We have 6 or 7 Mutants and Masterminds games that are all in the same continuity and impact each other. We're actually getting ready to do a big crossover next week between our Freedom League Dark stream, which I GM on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. EST, and our Gemstars game. Freedom League Dark is sort of Justice League Dark. It's the big superheroes who handle weird magic stuff, and the Gemstars are sort of our Sailor Moon style magical girls adventure. I'm really excited for the crossover. But there's also, it's not a stream, but there's a podcast that RC does called Masks and Mayhem, which is one of the longest running Mutants and Masterminds podcasts you can find anywhere podcasts are available. I listen on Spotify. Shadow the Wiz and King V's channels every other Wednesday. Cool. I will put that in the list and see if I can track you down. I stream on Wednesday, so that's not super awesome, but if I have a Wednesday off, I'll pop over and say hi in chat. I'm trying to think what else happened to Gen Con. We had I had a ton of fun running a couple of private games for some folks. I got to run my Mummy game for my friend Trent and his friends. Which it's funny you mentioned one shots becoming 2 or 3 shots, because that one that one adventure turned into 2 adventures. I'm gonna have to schedule some time on Roll20 with them to run the rest of that adventure. Apple Juice, are there any untold stories taking place in Lincoln? I don't believe so. We tend to hang out in the Earth Prime setting for Mutants and Masterminds. We have a stream set in Freedom City, a stream set in Emerald City, a stream set in a fictional place we call the Fondy, which is a gem dimension. We're getting ready to do one in New Orleans, Louisiana, which is going to be a ton of fun. We have one that takes place on Jupiter's moon, Europa, and yeah, I guess we have 2 in Freedom City because we have one at the Claremont Academy as well. Squire, it's good to see you. I hope you're having a great evening. I'm recovering from Gen Con, so we'll see how that goes. Yeah, I think just to summarize pacing real quick, though, make sure that you have a good plan going in. You have a strong introduction to hook people in. Oh, Lincoln is a neighborhood in Freedom City, Apple Juice, sorry. The Claremont Academy is not in Lincoln, and we have our Bowman tends to hang out in South Side, which is near Lincoln, but not in the neighborhood Lincoln. I thought you meant Lincoln, Nebraska. But yeah, make sure you have a strong introduction. Make sure you have a wide variety of scenes. Make sure all of those scenes are important to the story and propel things in an interesting way. The best way to do that is to make sure your transition material is very strong. So when you're in the wrap-up section, you know, what information have the players learned from this scene and what connections does that form to other scenes within the outline? Because the worst thing you can have for pacing is the players not knowing where to go next. They get the clues and they're like, well, I don't know what this clue means, so let's just sit here for a little while and either talk about where it's supposed to go or sit in silence while we wait for, you know, or flail and try to guess a bunch of different questions. You want to make sure your connecting material is very strong and a little obvious. I've found that making sure, you know, even if you think it's too obvious, sometimes that's better than not obvious enough. Another cool thing for pacing to keep in mind that I didn't mention earlier is to make sure that no skill challenge and no clue is completely load bearing. Make sure that, you know, if they miss this roll, they will never be able to figure out the information they need to continue the mystery or to continue the pace or to move to the next scene. Likewise, always make sure there are multiple answers, multiple ways to resolve a situation. Even if it's a negative way to resolve the situation, make sure that negative way propels the story forward in a certain way. So if they come to a door that's trapped and they can't figure out the puzzle, they can't get through the trap, you know, the door knocks them out and then somebody comes and collects them and then the scene moves on to the next scene. Just a little differently than you were expecting them when you're expecting them to get through the door. But ensure if it's a door and they can't get through it and they get punished by the door, that they get beyond the door basically as whoever captures them takes them inside their base. Things like that. Yeah, really ensuring that nothing is completely vital to moving the whole story forward. I like to Russian nesting doll my clues. So this clue means this, but if you go to this place, you can also get a clue that points here. So make sure there's multiple things that point from scene to scene so they know where to go. And there's sort of easy tack to keep an eye on things. Listening as a GM, again, very important. Making sure that you understand when you're listening to your players, are they engaged? Are they on? Are they happy to be here? And then making sure that you keep, even if the party splits, keeping, you know, checking in with each group on a regular basis of 5 to 10 minutes. And if those groups are split up and a fight happens, I usually roll one big initiative for each scene, and I'll have 2 maps or I'll have 2 theaters of the mind things going on, but it's one initiative tracker so that everybody's in the same fight, even if they're miles apart from each other. And then having good epilogue material to make sure they know I got points for this. This is the connection to the next adventure. This is basically how the plot has progressed. So they get a sense that their actions have meaning and things are progressing as they want them to be. Any other questions before I wrap up for the evening? And does anybody have any suggestions for what we should talk about next time, which will be 2 weeks from today? You know, the music on here is getting better, and I hope that's not, I don't know. I hope it's not because it's AI based and it's stealing music from other people. Yeah, if no one has additional questions, I'll go ahead and start wrapping up. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in for the Joy of Gamemastering. Oh, we have not talked about running combats yet, Apple Juice. Actually, 2 weeks ago, we had a discussion about combat in Mutants and Masterminds and some of the fun ways to design them and make sure they're good to run. But what are you struggling with in particular about combat? Yeah, I had a 2-hour long episode about combat for Mutants and Masterminds. I should probably go and grab that link for you in case you need it. Boom, 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 boom. So there's a link to the Balancing M&M Combat Encounters live stream if you want to take a look at that, Apple Juice. But Apple Juice says mainly managing player reactions and the like, what constitutes as a decent trigger and stuff. I think often, let me pull up the rules as written so I get this correct. But managing reactions is, generally I only give each of my players one reaction a round that they can use to do a reaction action. So if they're going to interpose, they can interpose once per round. If they're going to act with a triggered action, that's going to be one time per round, and ensuring that they have a trigger that is reasonable and makes sense is very important. Make sure it's something that happens frequently enough. Proximity-based triggers are awesome. So if a villain walks next to a certain thing, this happens. Or if a villain attacks, I could react this way. Or if I see somebody making an energy attack, this happens this way. Making sure that it's something specific and something that happens frequently is a very good tool. I'm going to look and see exactly what we say about triggers in the Deluxe Heroes Handbook here. And if you want to follow along, this will be on page, not responding for Adobe, this will be on page 196 of the Deluxe Heroes Handbook PDF. The trigger. You could set an instant duration effect with this modifier to activate under particular circumstances, such as in reaction or response to a particular danger after a set amount of time, in response to a particular event, and so forth. Chosen when you apply the modifier. Once chosen, the trigger cannot be changed. The circumstances must be detectable by your senses. You can acquire senses limited and linked to triggered effects if desired. Setting the effect requires the same action as using it normally. A triggered effect lying in wait may be detected with a perception check, DC 10 plus effect rank, and in some cases disarmed with a successful skill or power check. A triggered effect is good for one use per rank in this modifier. After its last activation, it stops working. You can apply an additional rank of trigger to have a variable trigger, allowing you to change the effect's trigger each time you see it. So I might be a little less strict about triggers in regards to only being able to do one at a time, because you do have to spend the action that you have to spend a standard action to begin the triggered effect, and then finding a trigger that applies to it. But like it says here in the book, doing something that is easily trackable, so the thing goes off at after 2 rounds, or the thing goes off if somebody comes within 5 feet of it, or the thing goes off if I press the detonator. and making sure you have a sense that's linked to your trigger, or being able to see the thing that you're trying to trigger from stealth, and making sure. I would say that the act of triggering a triggered event doesn't take a reaction, because you establish what triggers it, even if it's something that presumably feels like an action on the player's part, like pressing a detonator or making sure or having to activate it manually. I think that's baked into the action you use to do the triggering effect in the first place. As for other kinds of reactions, I'm going to go see exactly what we say about reactions here in the index. If we have something here, I'll tell you what page we're on when we get there. Reaction action type. Here we go. Page 236 of the Deluxe Heroes Handbook. So a reaction is something that happens in response to something else, like a reflex, like free actions. Reactions take so little time they're considered free. The difference between the two is a free action is a conscious choice made on the character's turn to act. A reaction can occur even when it's not your turn to act. Some powers and other traits are usable as reactions. So rules is written, you can do as many reactions as you want. But again, as the GM, you have the ability to limit that for some things, in my opinion. Being able to do all the reactions you want is a little much. For some reactions. I mean, if you have an energy aura that triggers every time somebody touches you, that'll happen every round. But if you have interpose in particular, I think interpose should only be once per round. Although I guess technically you can, if you have the deflect ability, you can deflect as many actions and as many attacks as you want. But interpose does specify once per round in the description here. Once per round, when an ally within range of your normal movement is hit by an attack, you choose to place yourself between the attacker and your ally as a reaction. So I would say keep an eye on it as a GM, and make sure it feels, just sort of guide it by feel. A lot of things with M&M is gut based, and a lot of it is situational. In my experience running M&M for the last 12 years. Any other questions? I'll definitely check out that combat stream too. Yeah, it was a very good discussion. And we built a sample combat on screen. So that we have at the Mutants and Masterminds Patreon. It should be available for download if you want an idea of how I lay out my combats and how I describe them. Or you could check out any of our Astonishing Adventures Assembled, because I follow a similar format when outlining those combat scenes in our published adventures. One other thing that I recommend for keeping pace up in combat is to not get too in the weeds when it comes basically to preparing your minions and the like. I like to just have an index card, and I like to make all my minions, if they're PL4, all other modifiers are 4, and I'm done with it. So +4 to hit, 4 damage, 4 dodge, 4 parry, 4 toughness. We're good to go on with life. It doesn't have to be that deep. And even some lieutenants and lesser villains, I'll do that too. Main villains, I'll do a whole stat block for, but I'll still keep it on an index card so I can reference it very quickly and not have to jump from page to page to page, or Hero Lab file to Hero Lab file. Awesome. But yeah, just wrapping things up. Here at Green Ronin Publishing, we've all just returned from Gen Con, so we're a little worn out, but we are on with life. Astonishing Adventures Assembled is our newest PDF here at Mutants and Masterminds. It came out last week. It was available at Gen Con, which I was very excited to get my copy in real life. If you did back the Kickstarter for the reprints, your books should be arriving. Some of you already have them, but they're shipping all over the place. So if you're receiving them, please feel free to post on social media that you received them. Take a look around this video if you would like, comment, anything like that. Apple Juice, I'm glad you're really enjoying the game so far. And we have a lot of things planned. We're still, Steve and I are still hard at work on the Valiant Adventures role-playing game. We're still on track, which is important. We're both working really hard. Vigilante's Handbook, I'm expecting to have all of the text for that soon. So that'll be coming out very soon. I'm excited to be able to, I'm excited to have that available for all of you. Finally, after so long. I did my writing on that in 2018, so it'll be great to it'll be great to be able to offer that book to you guys again. Join us tomorrow for Thursdage, which is where, or not Thursday. Join us on Thursday for Thursdage. I keep forgetting what day it is because I just got back from Gen Con. I'm all messed up. Thursdage, where Troy and special guests break down our age system. And then we'll be back here again next Monday for Mutants and Masterminds Monday. I don't know what we're talking about yet, but I'm sure Troy will let us know. That'll be at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll be on and we'll be talking all about something Mutants and Masterminds with Steve, Troy, and myself. And then we'll be back here again for the next Joy of Gamemastering on Tuesday, August 22nd. And I will bring a very good topic to discuss, I'm sure. If anybody has questions or has a suggestion for a topic, please feel free to post them here in chat, post them as a comment on this video, or you could email me at alex@greenronin.com with anything that's on your mind. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to have topics suggested, anything like that. Yeah, thank you very, very much for hanging out with us tonight. Learn Music, RC, Apple Juice. Good to see everybody. Squire, you were here. We'll be back. We'll see you next time. So thank you again, and have a great evening.